Let me go ahead and call the meeting to order here at 8:06 a.m. Things we're trying to discuss are we need to take a vote on the Q2 budgets report to affirm kind of the reallocations. So that's ready to go to full school committee. Next week, we can give an update on the FY27 budget. The select board had some presentation. The town administrator shared some updated kind of numbers, some things we've been working with them on. And so we can share that and talk about next steps of that. And then Katie put together some slides, just kind of part of that, I think, but put together some slides on the circuit breaker account. And then we have a proposed meeting date for the meeting with the select board finance committee on the 4th. So those are the things we need to cover. I guess I'm delaying a little bit in case Amanda got here, but if it's all right with you, Nathan, maybe I'll share just the update from the select board meeting on the updated number, so then we can.
Yeah.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Vote the
Yeah, we can vote the Q2. Why don't we go ahead and vote the Q2? That's a good point. So I will make a motion to accept the Q2 budget report from the school department.
I'll second that.
All in favor, roll call votes. Nathan?
Yes.
And I am a yes. So we will have that then ready for the next school committee meeting to accept. All right, now the FY27 budget timeline. So let me share my screen a little bit because I tried to just type this out this morning based upon their call yesterday. My apologies. Great, fine. Megan, can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, I know you're driving too, though, so be safe or in transit. I'll talk it all out. But again, this is information I just tried to put together so we could look at it and play around with it a little bit. Coming out of the select board meeting last night, the numbers have still been moving around a little bit because Chapter 78 came in. But essentially, again, our FY26 budget is this number here, $72,873,000 extra. Our level service budget, right, was 5.2% increase. That was $76,663,000. The initial town allocation was a 2.38% increase, $74,608,000. That was the kind of 2.05 million dollar kind of funding gap that we've been talking about. The town last night and I'll go through kind of the things that have changed, but with some revenue changes and some other kind of cost changes, are updating the school and town department percent increase from 2.38 to 3.29. And that brings our updated FY27 allocation from the town to $75,271,000. So that means our gap is about 1.4 million for level service, which is an improvement of about $663,000. So that is what has changed over the last kind of, again, three weeks that we've been talking to the town. Appreciate the town's work on this. So that's definitely an improvement. As we've said from the beginning, we didn't see any way the town was going to fully close this, but this is a positive reduction. Obviously, that's a lot of FTE. I did try and put this number into kind of the FTE. So we were originally talking about 26. It's still with an average FTE of 76, which I think is the number. I can't remember if it's 76 or 78. Still about 18 FTE. So it's not a small gap. I'll remind anybody listening, it's not going to be all FTE that will cut this. There will be other things we will look at, as John has shared previously, but that's just kind of a rough order of magnitude. To share just what has changed with the town.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, please, yeah.
Does that, excuse me, does that include the does that include the savings? The different places where John and Katie talked about cutting that were not,
This number here?
yes.
No,
Okay,
it doesn't include, this is just
No,
the
this is just the
allocation from the
allocation.
town and then,
Yeah.
you know, the things we've talked about will
yeah,
close that gap. That's like the 2.1 gap. So the things the town has shared that they've done, they're increasing the operating budget stabilization fund usage by another 235,000, so that'll go from 700,000 to 935,000. They're also depositing $1 million of free cash into that account to help build that up over the next several years, and so they're drawing down a portion of that for next year. So that's part of it. They're doing a debt service reduction. Essentially, I think it's the Cunningham fourth floor that they're not going to start the debt service on that this year. They're going to wait for FY28. So that's a $230,000 savings for FY27. That number is going to hit us in FY28. So, but that at least helps us in the short term. The savings from the school department taking on the health insurance of food service staff and pulling that into the food service budget saved the town $274,000. And then the net of state aids, the town we got some updated information from the governor's budget, which is usually indicative of kind of a new baseline funding for state aid, especially for schools. And so that is an additional $225,000. I'll note the way the town looks at state aid is that it is a common pot. So the majority, if not, I think all of this is really Chapter 70 state aid. The town does not view this as school funds. It views it as town funds that then is distributed across all departments. So just naming that, and any future change to state aid, Chapter 70 school state aid is treated the same. That's how Nick has done it in the past as well. So altogether, this is, you know, a little south of the $1 million, and then I think there's a couple other things that are happening. So it brings us to like the 1.1, about a $1.1 million change, which brings the entire gap to about 1.5, which the schools are taking on 1.4. So things we've asked the town to do to address our costs is increase use of operating budget stabilization fund. They are doing that. We also asked them to look at the division of the revenue gap. They have not done that. The town administrator talked about that last night. Received no pushback from the select board, so it appears that they are not interested in talking about allocating kind of more proportionally the funding gap.
so reason given,
The town administrator said that historically the schools in the town both get the same percent increase, which I think is not true. We didn't get the same percent increase in the override. We didn't get the same percent increase in my first year on the budget. And I'd assume if you look back over these years, all departments didn't get a 6.44% increase in 2023 or a 7% increase in 2017. So that was, and I want to be clear because I've heard other people make statements about what I've said, which isn't always 100% accurate. So I want to be clear. That is my understanding of what he was saying. I could be wrong, but that is their approach, is they are giving all departments the same percent increase. That's how they originally gave the 2.38. So they're allocating the funds and the same percent increase across all departments.
Mark,
And again-
could I ask a question on that one?
Please.
I just want to make sure I understand. Your understanding is that the logic behind the equal allocation of reductions is because that's how we've always done it?
It's the equal allocation of revenue.
Or
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and yes, that because he's saying that is what we've done historically, I believe is what I recall the quote being.
Okay. I guess, just for the record, if that is the logic, I would just go on the record as strongly disagreeing with that logic. I don't think it really withstands scrutiny. The thing that's challenging with all of this is that with this particular point is, like, at least I personally, I don't have any insight into what the economics of any of the other town departments. So if the town administrator came back and said, hey, look, we're facing X, Y, and Z budget constraints over on public safety and DPW, and we really need to share the burden, and there's benefits to school, like I could get behind that. But it's just like it's a black box, and I don't know what's in there, so it's hard to understand this sort of justification for allocating revenue.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel the same way for, yeah, their revenue projections, which again, we've gotten a bit more insight, but also their costs. I can almost certainly guarantee that across the various departments within the town side, every department is not getting a 3.29% increase. I wouldn't recommend the town administrator do that if he was like, each department is different. And so I assume the funds he's taking, he's divvying up across Council on Aging, DPW, fire, police, all the library, all the other ones, cemetery, and they're not getting kind of various percent increase. Again, to your point, it is a black box. I don't know. That's not kind of our realm. That's a select board's realm. But I think the overall point I was naming is just what we have asked the town to do and the select board and town administrator to consider. And again, they did one of them in terms of the operating budget. They are not apparently interested in doing the other. They did find some other places to do some savings, the debt service being kind of the primary place. Again, these other ones are more kind of school driven, this 500.
Yeah, can I ask about this? So chapter 70 is not educators.
Mhm.
So why would it be town like?
The way the town administrator views all state aid is that it's a collective pot of money that then he utilizes to balance the budget or to develop the budget. They do not, and I think this is true the past couple of years I've been on this. They do not say, hey, we're getting an extra 150,000 in chapter 78. The school's getting an extra 150,000. They are taking that, in this case, extra. Again, state aid for the schools is actually up, and I was trying to do the calculation here, Katie. I don't know if you have it, because the new governor's number is 150. I think the town was originally holding 70 or 75.
They were holding 30 minimum aid per pupil, and the governor's budget is 75.
Oh, okay.
And then typically, like last year, what had happened was the governor put 75, and then the House and the Senate increased it to 150.
Mhm.
So at chapter 70, there's definitely been some movement upwards.
Yeah.
From previous years.
So is that
So that's like,
typical though? Like I guess it's like if chapter 78 is supposed to be for education, I guess I don't understand why it doesn't go to education.
yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for the town administrator. I mean, there are other costs that hit the shared budget, right? There's like our costs actually went up slightly, I think, for what we have to pay the state for MBTA. I forget what that's called, the MBTA, like fee we pay. So some costs actually went up, or rural state aid, again, went up at a greater rate. But no, I don't know what other towns do.
I think it's a historic tension between towns and schools as to how chapter 70 gets distributed. I think there are districts that put it all into one pot, as the town administrator does here in Milton. There are places where they budget on a certain number, and anything over or in excess of that number. So they might say, we're all going to agree to 2% in November and December. And if the governor's budget comes in excess of that, like we have today, then sometimes there's discussions about that excess money going directly to schools. So I think it's a common discussion point, I think, in most municipalities. Mark, can I ask a question? So the reduction to schools, I think I had the wrong number, is 1,391,891. What is the actual dollar value of the town's reduction?
The dollar value of the town reduction I didn't put in here, but essentially, again, I think it was about 1.5.
No, so we're taking the 1.391 reduction in the town.
Yeah, our percent of the reduction is actually grown. So we're taking,
Yeah,
the proportion is that we're not around the 90%.
So I just want to make sure we can have it for the viewing public, what the dollar value is of that. Because it was 440 when we were at 2.1.
Yeah,
I'm assuming that's proportionally gone down.
Yeah, no, we were at 84-16 split. It's now the schools, I'm sorry, the town department level service request was 3.5458.
3.58.
And so, right, they're now at 3.29. So they're pretty close to what they were asking for at this point. So that means their reductions are quite minimal. Our reductions are still not, 1.4 is again way better than 2.1. I want to be clear, but still significant. So yeah, the overall gap I think is 1530474. I'm reading his chart right.
And that was updated to reflect the state aid numbers.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if we subtract 1530 and then we subtract 1391.
Yeah, we're at 91% of the
And the rough dollar value of that is $139,000 in the school side. I mean, on the town side, roughly 140,000.
Yes.
That's just a very rough number.
Yeah, a 70% split would have the schools at $1 million, town at. So. Yes, again, that's a place that I think we can continue to talk to, but the town administrator did directly address it last night at the select board meeting. And said he's not interested in that. And again, the select board members were all there, none of them pushed back on that at all. Nathan.
I have a question and a comment on the debt service one. If I heard your interpretation correctly, Mark, there's like 250,000-ish in debt service for the Cunningham Collycott renovations, which we should start paying in FY27, but somehow we're able to delay it a year to that initial payment until FY28. Is that right?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Do we just a clarifying question is, by delaying it for a year, are we sort of absorbing additional interest or penalties onto that debt?
It's a bit beyond my expertise. Like I'm not sure. We haven't talked directly with the town administrator about the debt service piece of this. I haven't. So I don't want to be on my skis here. I'd assume all he's doing is just he believes within the town's current budget he can kind of pay all the costs until we hit July of 28, and at that point he'll pull down some debt to kind of recoup some of those costs, and so then we'll start paying the interest at that point. That's what I assume is he's doing.
Okay.
So I don't think there'd be any
And
fees. It's a 1 year. As we
I guess
think
I'm
about
wondering on that particular thing, like I of not having to reduce our budget by that amount this year. It feels like, as far as we can tell, next year we're going to be in a very similar situation, and it could even be a more difficult situation, maybe not financially, maybe the numbers are kind of the same, but our options are going to be much slimmer. And any reductions are going to be more painful because we will have already cut into the bone of the school system this year a little bit. And a $250,000 cut next year just could feel worse. I'm sort of like, I was sort of wondering, like, should we just take a little bit of that hit this year to make next year's hit a little less painful? And it'll hurt more this year, but it'll hurt maybe less next year.
Yeah, it is a good point, Nathan, as it relates to like how any of these things impact next year. As you said, the debt service, as soon as it's not something we can do next year. Moving the food service, it's not something that's going to save us, when we have the $1.5 million gap next year. It's not going to be able to be a lever we pull next year. Obviously, we'll always hope state aid grows at a greater rate. operating budget stabilization fund, I'd assume this is, again, given they're putting $1 million free cash in there, this is an amount that they can utilize next year too. So there's some of these things can be pulled next year, but yes, some we can't. I don't know if this puts us in a worse spot next year with the debt service or not. Or really, I'd assume what it does is like 30 years out, instead of paying this in 20, finishing the payment in 2057, right? We're now finishing payment in 2058. I assume that is what it is. And so the difference between FY27, FY28 of like starting in FY27 or starting in FY28 will have minimal impact on FY28 itself. But again, I get beyond it. It's something I talked to I think your question, we could talk to the town administrator and make sure we're being clear that we are not looking for them to make the situation next year worse.
So it reminds me of the topic that we're talking about two things at the same time, and we have been over the last month of this work. What is the short-term work we can do to sand the edges down for the FY27 budget, which, we made almost $1 million of progress in that. And then the next conversation is the long-term conversation about whether or not the town and schools, A, should have the same percentage, and B, whether that percentage should be anywhere less than 4%. We as a school district, and I think we showed the data last week that school districts across the state grow at between 4.5 and 5.5 or 5.2. And I think Jay Fundling, the head of the warrant committee, had done some quick research on that and found similar data. So the next level of discussion related to FY28 and beyond, I think really begins after we finish this FY27 conversation. We need to really focus on the long-term percentage breakdown of what the schools in the town should be looking to use as a guideline to ensure that we provide town services, because keeping it at 3% to me is not an option for the Milton Public Schools. So that's the second half of that, right? So I think, Nathan, if we're trying to figure out what do we want, how do we use that information moving forward to inform what we do in FY27? It's, we have to be thoughtful about how do we want to reduce and how do we want to keep positions based on the fact that we're going to see continued strain on our budget period moving forward. Even at 4.5%, that will present a problem. So even if we win that long-term discussion to go from 3 to 4.5, we will still be in some thin, lean years moving forward that we should be thoughtful about now. And thoughtful about it, obviously, next year when we get into that next level of budgeting.
Yeah, I do think the historical piece, 3.29, so again, way better than 2.38. That increase is great. Love to keep talking with them about how we adjust that further. 3.29 brings us from the lowest percent increase in the last 15 years to the second lowest percent increase in the last 15 years. So also just want to put that change in perspective. Only FY20 was lower. So it gets us a little closer to alignment of these other ones. But again, as we said, a 0.5% increase change, which gives like the 3.7. That's what save us $400,000. Yeah. $400,000. So I'd get us down to that million, which again would be around that kind of more proportional split, that 70%, 70-30 split of the town's revenue gap. So I think we can continue to have that conversation with the town. I think a question, two things coming out of that. We'll jump to the meeting schedule with the select board finance committee, the town administrator in a sec, but I do have a question on communication with families around this change, given that town administrator has given us this updated number. Is this something that we think we would, similar to what we emailed last time when we had the 2.1 million, we provide like an email update to folks to say this is the new number as of
so we emailed last week to staff, and they come out of the Thursday notification over the weekend. There was a blurb over the weekend, but we will send something out. Would prefer to set. I want to send items out that are timely and accurate, and also be able to indicate whether there's going to be any shift in that moving forward. So we're trying to give the question that we're always trying to answer is, what did you know and when did you know it?
Mhm.
So whatever we know, when we know, we have our family and our community and our staff know. So yes, this would be a new thing that we can send out this week, and we could talk to Stephanie O'Keefe. We can do this as a standalone. I would want to make sure that I have clear guidance from Nick about if there's still room for us to move on this, because I don't want to say anything that's final, but I do want to get the community update that goes out. They did get an update this weekend. I think you got a community email. Did you get it did you get it Sunday night?
Might have been a lot of sense.
There may have been a budget update in the family version of the newsletter. We sent one to the staff, and usually it's the same. So we did give an interim update last weekend, which feels like 3 weeks ago, given the snowstorm, but I think it was out there. And we will provide whatever we know by Thursday. We'll put in the Thursday announcements as well.
But yeah, I would definitely leave yourself room. Wiggle room of like updated number. I'm still working with the town. Good change.
And we will, so when we talk about numbers, and I know that we want to talk about special education as well. These numbers also are coming in with the town still making available $500,000 to put into our special education reserve accounts, whatever we can figure out as a vehicle to make that happen, in addition to the reduction in the gap that we've gone from 2.1 down to 1.4. They are still committed to, at least with Nick last night until the select board meeting, willing to provide another $500,000 to support the gap in our reserves for special education, which is also welcome, and we're grateful for. But we will put that into that account that we're trying to put aside for the upcoming years. Again, that account has $4,000 in it, and it should have $3.1 million. So we are actively trying to make that a priority with the school committee and the administration this year. We plan on making gradual deposits over the course of 5 years. That $500,000 would go a long way in shoring up that amount. That amount is very, very important to the stability of the general education budget that we're talking about now. So when folks say, well, I'm not sure what that is, why do they need that? That is an essential part of our balance sheet as an organization, to make sure our revolving accounts have healthy balances in order to make sure that we don't have to go into our general fund if anything happens within that, the ranges of our revolving account budget lines, like special education, transportation, athletics, etc. So that's going to have to be part of our story as well, to let the public know.
Yeah, and that transitioned us well into, I think, some slides Katie put together on the circuit breaker. Before that, we're jumping down a bit, I guess, into next meeting dates, but I think everybody got the email that the select board, Nick Milano, is looking to schedule a meeting on the 4th, next Wednesday. John had already raised that in conflict at our normal time next Wednesday, so we're not going to be here next week at 8 a.m. But they offered 4:30 to 5:30, which is obviously close to we do have school committee that night at 7. So just raising that here, what is folks' availability? 4:30 meeting, select board finance.
And this would be, would we still have the finance committee meeting in the morning, or this would be in lieu of that?
It would be in lieu of that.
Okay.
Yeah, John, we couldn't have that anyways. We were talking about meeting at a different time, but I think we'll just have this in lieu of that. And then the 11th, the following week, is when we expect to have kind of the next draft of the budgets, based upon kind of the changes.
Yeah. It partially works for me. I can't fully answer right now if that time works for me. I need to check something. But if it works for others, let's lock it in. And I know I can make part of it. I just don't know if I can make the full thing. I need to confirm something.
Okay. All right. I will email Nick back and reserve that time. Move forward in that next check in so we can talk about some of these things and see.
If we pushed it back, would it? Maybe the ability to push it back.
Yeah, but that's a good question. Is your conflict more on the front end or the back end?
The front end. I have something from 4 to 5, which again, I may be able to move, but that's what the conflict is.
I want to take a look at our agenda for that night, or if you look where we already posted. Post them on, you can just do the 70 at 7:00.
Oh, just have them join the school committee meeting?
Yes. Right
Yeah.
now, for February 4, we have community schools, student service update, and district curriculum update. So we could actually put them on, we could put them on at 7:00.
Okay.
Oh, all right.
I can offer that.
That might be
Yeah.
just a way to get it done.
I think that's a good idea. I think the other members will appreciate that.
Yeah, I would
too.
agree.
So that's a good idea, John. All right, I will offer that. Anything else with y'all talked about with the town or any other updates on the overall kind of FY27 budget before we jump into Katie's slides?
Yeah, I did not watch the select board meeting, but I can say that we have been communicating with Nick and Amy. Katie and I have been. I'm thankful for this reduction going from 2.1 to 1.4. I'm thankful for the $500,000 for special education stabilization and or circuit breaker funding for that work that we have been doing by ourselves, moving those values higher in those revolving accounts. And want to continue to advocate for what's the needs of the schools in any way we can balance this process. But I appreciate Nick and Amy's work, answering calls and meeting regularly over the last few weeks. It's just me.
Okay, agreed. Share. All right. Can you see this, Nathan? Slides?
Yes, sir.
All right. Uh,
Oh, what do you do?
Words from that just,
So I know there's been, a few questions that have come up because there are different areas that we receive funding in order to offset some of the expenses that we see within the school department. So I think I just wanted to be able to kind of collect some information and then share it with you all so that we can then share it with the public. Just in an effort to provide more information, hopefully clarify some of the questions that have been recurring questions. And this is a huge part of the process, of the budget process. Not only was it a huge part in previous years, there's a major implication for this year, and it will continue to be a huge part of the budget process for future years. So just again, in an effort to just put some information in a centralized place around special education funding, specifically circuit breaker funding and the special ed stabilization fund. So special education funding expenses are funded through a combination of sources. So it's not just the operating budget. For special ed, we receive federal funding, state funding, and of course, local funding. So the local funding is the funding that we receive from the town of Milton through the tax levy and also through other local revenue sources. So this is just information on some of the federal funding sources. There are two major grants that we receive funding for special education. It's the Special Education IDEA grant or 240 grant. And then also the Early Childhood grant, the 262 grant. So those are the federal grants that we receive. Those are entitlement grants, meaning that we receive them on an annual basis. And these are subject to any of the changes that we may see at the federal level. So it's really important for us to just keep an eye on what's happening kind of with the federal budget, if there's any impacts there, because it then could impact the grant funding that we receive. We also receive state funding, so we already talked a little bit about Chapter 70. Chapter 70 provides general education aid, meaning that the funds are not specifically earmarked to special ed, but there is a part of the Chapter 70 calculation that provides more funding for special education students, just in the overall calculation of how much funding that the town will receive. And then the other piece of state funding is the circuit breaker funding. So that's the funding we've talked a lot about. That is a reimbursement program, and that provides financial assistance to schools to offset the cost of special education services. And that is when we are reimbursed for expenses that we paid for specific costs in the previous fiscal year. So there's just more information on both of these state funding sources, kind of a reference to finance regulations in the Mass General Law. And then the local funding, again, the operating budget, and then another piece of local funding is the Special Education Reserve Fund. So the Special Education Reserve Fund and the Circuit Breaker funds are two separate funds, Circuit Breaker being funded by the state, Special Education Reserve being funded by the town. Circuit Breaker, that is the account that we've talked about that had the $8,000 balance at the beginning of this fiscal year. Special Education Reserve Fund was established last year, so it exists, but it has zero balance. So that I just want to make sure that we're kind of clear on the differences between the two. So this is just a summary, the FY26 summary of what the amounts are for each one of these funding sources. So you can see for IDEA and 262, those are the two federal grants. Those are the allocations for fiscal year 26. We use the IDEA grant to offset the cost of out of district tuitions. We use the 262 grant to offset a portion of a cost for one employee that works with our preschool program. And then we also have the Chapter 70 state aid. And that was our fiscal year, again, fiscal year 26 allocation. And then the circuit breaker reimbursement that we received for this year. For the local budget, I just pulled the piece of the operating budget that is under the special education cost center. So that includes the costs of teaching staff. It includes our out of district tuition costs, transportation costs, instructional material costs. So that's everything for special education that's held within that cost center in the operating budget. And then the other local pieces, that special education stabilization fund, it's established, but the balance is frozen. There's no money in that account. So there are impacts. So anytime there are changes to federal and state funding, it does impact local funding, and the kind of the pressure that is put on the municipality in order to cover the expenses. And so any reduction in federal or state funding, which we oftentimes refer to as revenue offsets, could have the same impact as an increase in expense to the local budget. And so anytime we talk about fluctuations with circuit breaker, we talk about fluctuations and impacts of what's happening at the federal level. We talk about those and we focus on those because it could potentially put more pressure on the local budget or on the school's operating budget. So it's always important to just keep an eye on those funding levels at the state and federal level. So this just shows if you have $5 million in expenses and you get you're receiving $2 million from the federal and state, then the operating budget would have to cover 3 million. However, if there is a reduction, so if your expenses are $5 million, but you only receive 500,000 from both federal and state, local funding has to pick up more. So the local funding has to cover that additional $1 million. And so it's really important whenever we talk about how much circuit breaker money are we going to use, how much are we receiving, kind of the whole process of making sure that the balances are established at the level that we think that they should be. We always just have to keep in mind any impact that it would have to the operating budget. So some of just this slide just outlines some of the key differences between the circuit breaker account and special education stabilization account. There's differences with the source of how they're funded. So one being state funded, the other being locally funded. The purpose of the accounts, the cap or the limits to the account. So circuit breaker is uncapped. The best practice is to have to retain the previous year's reimbursement. The stabilization fund is capped by law at 2% of the district's net school spending. The usage timing is a little bit different. Circuit breaker funds are received for costs incurred in the previous fiscal year, and the stabilization funds can be used in the current year. And really the intent of it is to handle immediate cash flow issues. So if you have an unanticipated, unexpected cost that wasn't in the budget, that is the intent of having that stabilization fund so that you can pay for that expense and not have to impact the rest of the school's operating budget. In circuit breaker, so just the reimbursement type, I'm sorry, I keep moving this around. Circuit breaker covers, so we're reimbursed for the cost of tuition and transportation. Stabilization funds are more flexible, so those can cover any unanticipated or unbudgeted costs, including in-district or out-of-district services. So I think sometimes we talk about these kind of interchangeably, but there are a couple of key differences. So just wanted to kind of call those out just to keep in mind what the differences are as we talk through kind of the budget process and how we can use both of those funds. I'm doing a very bad job at, I'm sorry, displaying, but like just moving things. So just some information on circuit breaker. Again, the best practice is to retain 1 year of circuit breaker reimbursement to be used to offset costs in the current fiscal year. As the payments are made, those funds are retained to be used in the next fiscal year. So the payments are made on a quarterly basis. And the practice that we want to get to is that as those payments are made, those are just, we don't spend them right away. Those are put into the circuit breaker revolving account so that they can be used in budgeting and in administration of the upcoming fiscal year. So for fiscal year 26, if we were utilizing that practice, the balance in the circuit breaker account should have been about $3.1 million, which is the previous year's reimbursement amount. But as of July 1st, 2025, the circuit breaker balance was $8,000. So that is, we've talked about that a lot, but that is just something that when we look at the budget, when we look at the operating budget and some of our other funding sources, knowing that the balance was only $8,000, it's something that we knew we needed to address in the process. So to address the low balance and to ensure budget sustainability, that was again, as a part of our budget philosophy for this year, a huge piece of it was budget sustainability and looking at what are we doing in our budget practice to ensure sustainability for future fiscal years. We reduce the circuit breaker utilization in the current fiscal year so that we can retain some of that reimbursement funding to reestablish the fund balance. our goal was to reestablish that balance over the course of 3 to 5 years. So we knew that we couldn't just do it here, because again, that would have put a lot of pressure on the local budget, and it would have impacted the school's operating budget in other areas. And so we said that we were going to try to lessen the impact to the operating budget by reestablishing the balance over the course of multiple years. And the target was to retain from 750,000 to 900,000 in reimbursement funds per year, again, to iteratively build up that balance. So you can see this is just a snapshot of the actual numbers. So we started for circuit breaker with 8,000. This is the reimbursement amount, 3.5 million. That's the amount of money that we're receiving this year. This is the amount of money that we'll have to utilize this year to cover our expenses. And so we're projecting that this is going to be the balance at the end of fiscal year 26. Again, the goal is to get to 3.1 million. So while it's not $8,000, it's also not $3 million. So we have to just continue to follow that practice year over year until we get to that balance. So the way that the fiscal year 27 budget is currently built is saying we're projecting to have $1.1 million as the starting balance. We are making the projection or assumption that our reimbursement will be similar next year as it is this year. And that we will have to utilize $2.6 million of that reimbursement to cover expenses for next year. And so at the end of fiscal year 27, the ending balance will be almost $2.1 million. And then it's the same process for fiscal year 28, starting with 2.1. We're assuming that we would receive about 3.5. We would have to use about 2.6, and that will get you back to the ending balance closer to the 3.1. So that is just outlining how we're projecting out, or how we're trying to budget, not only in current fiscal year, next fiscal year, but in the future, so that we can get back to that circuit breaker balance that's so important to be able to offset expenses for special ed. So if we utilize more of the circuit breaker funding, so if we cover more of our expenses on an annual basis, it just simply means that we'll be able to keep less year over year, and it's going to take us longer to reestablish the funding balance. So if we're able to retain, you can see if we're assuming that this is our reimbursement, this is just shows you how much of the expenses that we could potentially cover. And this is how much of the balance that would be retained. And that's how long it would take us to get back to that $3.1 million. And so I think ultimately thinking about why this matters, just knowing that a reduction in federal or state funding, which there is a very real possibility that there could be fluctuations in federal or state funding, it will have the same impact to our operating budget as an increase in expenses. So very similarly, if we increase our utilization of our state or federal funding, there would be a corresponding decrease to the local budget, or the amount of money that we need to utilize from the operating budget. If we increase the use of circuit breaker funding in fiscal year 27, it will just take us more time to reestablish that fund balance. So instead of reestablishing that and having a fully funded circuit breaker balance at the end of fiscal year 28, it may take us until 29, 30, 31, 32. And then the fund balance ensures stability and funding for special education costs, which can be variable in nature, and that's something that we've just struggled with in previous fiscal years. We've talked a lot about this when we talked about the utilization of free cash. Is free cash going to circuit breaker? Is it going to the special ed stabilization fund? What happens if that free cash goes into that fund? And is there an impact in the operating budget? And so a lot of that is kind of, can be confusing because there's several accounts, they're funded in different ways. So I really just wanted to be able to kind of provide a little more information, just in the hopes that even if it kind of like answers one question or provides a little bit of more clarity on kind of the budgeting process that we're using in order to offset some of those special ed costs, that we have it. And I think this is something that we'll have to just update kind of as we move forward, but just some more information kind of in the context of the conversations this year with the town.
Thank you, Katie. And it also will be on the website. So as a resource, it stands alone as a resource. And if the numbers need to be updated, we can update them for the viewing public, specific to out of district and how we use circuit breaker. These are bills that have to be paid.
Yeah.
These aren't choices. These are actually bills. So we're trying to organize our financial planning in order to make sure that we can pay our bills first. These are bills that need to be paid first. Thank you very much for that.
Have we seen any, just knowing all the changes that there have been on the federal level, education, have we seen an impact of that already? I mean, I know like IDA funding is already not even near where they get. So have we seen any impact yet, or is that
Not yet. What I've heard is that it would be level funded. And so, in the past, because our expenses increase year over year, typically the grants will increase, even if it's just a small amount, but there is somewhat of an increase year over year. But from what I'm hearing, I believe that the federal funding is going to be level funded, meaning we'll get the same amount next year that we got this year, which because of the increases that we hear incur year over year, it could result somewhat in a reduction at the federal level.
Nathan?
Thanks, Mark. Katie, this is great. And I think I'm glad it's going up on the website. I think it'll help people understand why saving in this way is important, even when our operating budget is not where we want it to be. Can you, I have two questions about the goal we're shooting for here, which is, forget the exact number, but in the $3.5 million range, for a target balance. For John and for Katie, in your prior experience, have you seen in other districts that they have consistently been able to maintain whatever the balance is needed year over year? And I am curious if anyone knows when the last time was that Milton Public Schools had the right target balance saved in the circuit breaker fund. And I'm asking both of these because I think, it's the other side of the coin for having this conversation at all, which is how aspirational is this goal that we're setting? Is it achievable? Are we putting ourselves at a higher standard than other districts might? And I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
I'll start by saying it's not aspirational as much as it is healthy financial guidance from the state. So when we look to, what to save and what that account should look like, the state gives us guidelines on what a healthy school district's balance sheet should look like. And that's keeping whatever reimbursement you get in this fiscal year, you hold on to it. So you can budget for the following fiscal year, knowing that amount is within your budget. So most districts who can maintain that kind of a healthy environment, which is what everybody's target is 1 year's worth of circuit breaker. That might go up and down, maybe $100,000, $200,000 from year to year. But it should never go down to $8,000 as it did in fiscal 26 here in Milton. It should never be zero. It should always be a healthy balance And the guidance from the state is 1 year's worth of circuit breaker, which is 3.5 for Milton. And right now we're just trying to reach that 3.1 target in order to kind of get as close as we can without over challenging our operating budget as well.
So, other districts, I think that is the practice, that I've seen and kind of tried to bring to the other districts that I've worked into, is just having that full year, of circuit breaker reserve. It just helps with the budgeting practice. That's why I think that was always a priority for me. Coming to Milton and talking about budget sustainability is, that's a huge piece of being able to create a budget, just because those expenses are, can be variable in nature. So, I always thought it was really important to make sure that the balance was appropriate. And again, that it's similar in other communities as well. Like, that is the target, to have a full year of circuit breaker.
This was a slide that we shared with the warrant committee and select board last year during the override work, and Katie pulled together the history of the circuit breaker account. So to your question of, has Milton achieved this? The answer is no, at least going back to FY16, or maybe FY15. I think that means that we shouldn't be achieving this. There are a lot of other things that Milton historically wasn't doing that we, identified weren't good, and so we are now doing better of. I do think of, again, closing out FY24 when the account was fully closed out. If this had been at the $2.5 million mark, right, the $700,000 we needed to go to the town to ask for, we wouldn't have had to go to the town to ask for. The next year, when we had the $2 million gap, we still would have had, an extra $1 million. So that gap immediately is halved. And so all the work we did to essentially cut that $2 million gap to $1 million gap, we now, with the circuit breaker reserves, would have been able to fully close that and would have had no pressure on the town. So I just think, like, from the last 2 years and the circumstances we were put in by not meeting the state guidance, I think clearly shows the importance of creating this. Because again, I think the feedback we got clearly from the town was, you need to be able to manage your budget internally. And so this is a little bit why, like, when we get some pushback from the select board on our goal of doing this, I'm not sure why. Because I think it's an extremely important goal for us to meet kind of that expectation that I think is very reasonable, which is we need to be able to have mechanisms where we can address funding issues. Again, out of district placement costs going up 12%, whatever it was that year, that kind of really put pressure on FY24. We need to have this in place, and $5,000 doesn't do that currently.
No.
So that was your question.
Yeah, thanks for that, everyone. I mean, I completely agree with all of this. And I mean, the slide you just showed, Mark, is helpful context to sort of demonstrate that at least over the last decade, Milton has not had a culture of sort of financial culture of saving appropriately for these expenses. And so there's some inertia that we're also fighting against there. It's hard to change that behavior.
I do want to be clear that to anybody watching, the goal of rebuilding circuit breaker was stuff we talked about during the override process last year. The schools received a $700,000 cut to level service through the override process. Even with that, we cut further in order to embed within our operating budget this ability to kind of start to build this back, because we knew this was an urgent priority. This is adding 0% to the school's level service request for next year. It has zero impact on the revenue gap that the town is experiencing. So, like, I think it's right that we look at everything within our budget, but this is not a budget driver in any way, as it relates to kind of what the issue we're dealing with and now the $1.4 million gap that we're needing to address. It's not being caused by this at all. I do think the question of in front of us is timeline, like what is a reasonable timeline? What is a too aggressive timeline, kind of given the current pressures have? What's too slow of a timeline? Because as you said, we have unknowns around future federal funding. You know, as you say, we can have a super expensive kind of out of district placement come up at any point and any year, because if a kid comes in front of us and needs something, we need to provide that to the student regardless of cost. So I know we were at 9:06, Nathan, and I think you might have a harder stop. I did have try to map some of this out a little bit. And I think the other piece I was wondering is we said 3.1, but as Nathan said, like the current number really is 3.5. And I think we talked about within our policy having whatever we received last year, that is what should be our bank account. We shouldn't be using anything with the current year. It's really the new number. If we were receiving 3.5 million this year, should be 3.5. Is that
For next year.
For next
So
year, yeah.
the year in arrears,
Yeah.
because that's the reimbursement. But I
Yes.
think last year was, I believe it was 3.1.
Yeah, it was 3.1. So it is growing.
Right.
And we anticipate our expenses to continue to grow. Hopefully so I try to do a little bit of modeling here too, which I think was connected to kind of your stuff, but it just allows us to play with it. So as you said, our current circuit breaker utilization, what we're carrying over for next year is kind of a $900,000 gap to help us build that back. You said that would get us kind of there, and this is our current gap. This is our current circuit breaker funding that we're receiving in the current year. This is what we anticipate the back gap being, as you said. This is all your numbers, so I'm just double checking or restating kind of what Katie said. We are expecting the town said they were going to do a $500,000 deposit into this, which is fantastic. That should help us kind of meet this goal quicker or slower, or adjust this number. But so this is the remaining gap going into FY27. And so if we have $900,000, then essentially that would take a little over 2 years to kind of get there. As we say, our costs are going up. So I tried to take into account some, like I just put 4%. That's a total guess. I don't know what that is. But that would assume that after 2 years, the actual number is 3.8 with a 4% compounding rate of growth. So that still gets us like 2.2. If we adjust this number, you can see how these things adjust, they still keep us in. So I think the question for this as a committee is like, is 3 years the right plan? I think one of the select board members said 5 to 7 years. That to me feels too far out.
Vulnerable. I mean, it's sort of feels like it's not doing anything if it's 5 years. Do you know what I mean? Like you're so vulnerable.
And it seems like if we put the target out to 7 years, we're just going to be chasing that annual increase the whole time too, which, you know, if history tells us anything, it's probably more than 4%. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I think something you named too, Nathan, and John came up to is we also, given our projections for FY28, the gap that the town is going to have us experience again. And again, we're hoping we can have conversation with the town to address that and shrink that. But I still won't see a circumstance really based on kind of the conversations like we'll have where I think we're still going to have several $100,000 gap at minimum, if not a $1.5 million gap, which I was projecting. So I think we are going to need mechanisms as we move forward to think about how we shrink that gap in the out years until the next override. And so if we were to do something where we say, hey, we want to get it to 4 years, we're going to cut this all the way to $500,000. I don't think that would be like 4.5 years. I think in my mind, we want to keep it under 4 years because I think we need to get this done before the next override. But if we do that all this year, I think that doesn't help us. It doesn't give us any other levers for future years. So it like helps FY 27 and FY 28.
Yes.
We're rough.
Right.
We can't cut it further. We've already cut it to the bone. And so that's another thing I'm trying to keep in mind. My mind.
There'll always be a healthy tension between what we want to do with our staffing and our operating budget and how do we want to maintain the level of these revolving accounts in order to provide the security that we need to protect the budget year to year. That going from 3.1 to 3.5 in 1 year, that's a $400,000 increase. That itself speaks to wanting to make sure that we're dedicating revenue. We're not always going to have the town's ability to give us an extra $500,000. Next year will be a slim year. I think, however, we can solidify that line in our budget, but fiscal 27 would provide us the best flexibility moving forward for trying to reach our goal for a period of time. So I think, I know that this is a dotted line to some of our community members who don't really understand it, and I respect that. But this is a very important balance sheet for the history of the schools since 2015 or 16 to only have 350,000 in that account was a real gamble on the administration side to hope that nothing was going to pop in any one of those years. In moving that money around to make everything work, you leave yourself very vulnerable. So to Nathan's question earlier, is it best practice? Yes. Is it state guidance? Yes. To have roughly 1 year circuit breaker, and does it create a healthy balance sheet so you can protect the other, $70 million worth of budgeting that you have for your general ed functions? The answer is yes, and that's what our sustainability piece of wanting to be able to have a district that's sustainable moving forward, I think, relies on not only this revolving account, but there's a couple of other revolving accounts that we want to shore up: transportation, athletics, clubs and activities. We want to make sure that they are robust enough to be able to withstand any bad year over the next few years. So this is an important discussion, and it does have. We will be asked questions. Well, can't you only take 400 of that and just add back that FTE, or when is the right time to have that discussion? I think right now that we've been able to reduce the amount from 2.1 to 1.4. That gives us a lot better scenario in order to be more thoughtful about keeping as much in the circuit breaker account as we can. So we have an 11 o'clock meeting with our principals to go through what those reductions are, showing the new numbers. Again, trying to be thoughtful about what the next 2 or 3 years looks like and how we want to prepare each one of these lines in the budget in a more sustainable way. And we have a couple of hard years of sledding moving forward while we try to convince the town that a 3% goal is not going to be, will not result in a school system that the taxpayers want. And we really need to work at collectively as a town, increasing that percentage on an annual basis moving forward. That's the next big piece of work I think we have to do.
Yeah, I have a quick question. I totally agree that we continue advocating strongly for the town to, be thankful for the movement and can keep pushing. But my question about this, whether we are talking about 3-year goal to 4-year goal, would this sort of be something the school committee should vote on as an intent or a plan? Because even with a 3-year goal, part of my concern and why I feel very concerned about which I don't think anyone here is talking about, the 7-year goal. Like, it's quite possible none of us around this table will be here in even 3 years. And I really want to make sure that there's follow through on this plan, and that I'm wondering if the school committee were to, I don't think it's possible or wise to set a policy that involves like numbers, but could there be a way to move it beyond just a conversation to something that has been memorialized as guidance in which a future school committee, if they were not following the guidance for whatever reason, justifiable or not, but they would not be in a position to just disregard without. Is that something?
So I think what we talked about here is, with the revolving accounts policies, trying to create a policy that names having the 1 year of circuit breaker in arrears as being a fiscal policy that needs to be followed by school committee and school departments. And again, to drop below that would require some voter approval by the school committee,
Okay.
so that, again, going back to the situation to close that by 24, that just happened, like, department at that point just doesn't fully utilize that account without any necessary approval or conversation about doing so. I think is the concern, and so that there's at least a more purposeful discussion of like, hey, we're dropping below this recommended threshold. We need to do that. I think what you're naming in addition to that is, well, I think what we talked about a bit within the policy is like that we would say, if you drop below, like, then what is creating a plan for how to get back there, like what is the goal of getting back there, which is essentially this point.
So if that policy is in place, then it just really requires an annual conversation and approval for each year that we continue to build up
Yeah, until we
Until we
reach
get
that
the
goal
thresholds.
threshold.
Okay. I just want to be like super clear so that this
Yeah.
can be carried forward in the institutional knowledge of like what's not like someone's desire to do.
Good policy.
We're on a path. And
And that can then be communicated to the warrant committee and the select board as a structure.
Right.
Just like the select board and the town is exploring policies for their reserve accounts. Do you know what I mean? They've already paid off, if I'm correct, the pension fund. So they set a policy and wanted to reach that maximum amount in savings. So they were aggressively paying that off. So this would be a similar one for us. We're trying to aggressively get to that point, or we're trying to moderate it a little bit given the circumstances, but the town is trying to create policy for their stabilization accounts. We're trying to do the same thing because they give you guidelines on how you need to budget and where the money needs to go and why. And I do believe that it should be some sort of a vote if it's ever going to go below, if it's ever going to go backwards in any way. There should be a very clear public conversation about that because the impact of that in later years is so vital that it needs to be a public conversation for sure.
Want to be mindful of the time here, so appreciate everybody. I think my takeaway is we might have some flexibility within the circular utilization carryover number, like 900,000. Maybe that can go down slightly, maybe not. Again, there are negative effects for out years in terms of what that means and flexibility that provides us. But I think as y'all are figuring out now how to address this, the new target number 1.4. I trust y'all as y'all have that number in your head and think about the other positives and negatives around the hard decisions that will need to be made. So just so maybe decide to shrink this slightly or decide not to shrink this and needs to be out. That's great. Conversation within the context of the whole budget presentation.
And we also need to solidify the mechanism by which the $500,000 can be appropriated to the schools from the town. We would prefer it to be in the operating budget format. There might be some complications about it going into circuit breaker from a technical perspective that we need to explore with Nick. And whether or not it's not as flexibly available if we put it into the town stabilization special ed, because you can't get it unless you have a vote of the select board and the school committee. So we're trying to figure out what the best way is to receive those funds. And I would also say, back to Nathan's point earlier, there's some one-time chunks the town was able to utilize one-time chunks to get us from 2.1 to 1.4. Whether they're available next year or not is a very big question, and whether we can scaffold this conversation to go from a 3% increase expectation to a 4.5. The more money that we can shore up this year for circuit breaker moving forward, because we might not be able to make the same deposit next year going into 28 as we thought. So trying to kind of keep that in perspective as well. So we'll be coming out with a rationale for that for the school committee to consider, to your point, Mark.
Yeah, honestly, something I was thinking about with the $500,000 free cash allocation is some of the other needs we talked about on the capital side of the lights for the field. Things like that's around $480,000. So if they weren't utilizing free cash for this, we were still just doing the process we had talked about and planned on. Funds to be used for. There are lots of needs within the town, so lots of demands on free cash. Anyway.
And just for Amanda and Lizzie to know, we voted the Q2 earlier with Mark and everything being a majority of the finance subcommittee, so that's on. So
I was listening while I drove for this, exciting job.
All right, moving forward, again, next meetings will be 2-4, emailed Nick, so we'll see what they say about being joined full school committee. If they say they cannot join full school committee at 7 o'clock, our backup 4:30 slot, and again, Nathan might be delayed in joining. Okay. And then we have our meeting on, so there's no 8 a.m. meeting next week at this time. Next meeting at 8 a.m. here will be on the 11th with the second round of the draft budget for FY27. Also, sorry, I just want to give an update. I did meet with the warrant committee subcommittee, school subcommittee. Those 3 folks, good conversation. Essentially, just went through the slides, the FAQ slides that we shared at school committee. This is Julia.
And
Was Joey
and
Elaine.
Italy.
So they are kind of just now starting to get caught up and look at some of our meetings and things like that. So they said they would. We have 2 other meetings scheduled with them, one next week, I believe, and one right when we get back from February break. So we will. I need to post those, and so we'll talk to Charlie about that today. Mostly just kind of giving them general information, no particular questions or concerns coming out of that conversation. Great. Anything else to discuss before we adjourn? Okay, then I will take a motion.
So
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, roll call, Nathan?
Yes.
Man,
yes.
and I'm yes, you're returned. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, you. Thank you.